Hello, I'm Samantha from the Makespace. You can find more patterns at www.themakespace.uk. In today's video, we're going to be sewing the Open Top Tote, a super simple yet stylish upgrade to a regular shopping tote. We've got some beautiful little feet on the bottom there with a solid mesh base. We've got these darts in the corners. That's what gives this tote its shape. Little bit different, little bit fun and quirky. I love that detail. And then some gorgeous handles which will fall down casually if you pop your bag down. Inside we've got a zip pocket and a slip pocket. The slip pocket is quite large, so I've divided mine into a pen slot and then two slightly larger pockets. Inside we've got that shape mirrored again on the bottom corners. Don't know if you can see that. It just makes a great tote. There's no fastening to this one. It's intended for you to shopping, beach, spa, swimming pool, day out at the park, anything like that, where you just need something that's a little bit more sturdy, little bit of an upgrade, but you still need easy access into the top. That opens up really, really wide. So I've made this version out of quilting cotton. This is Lewis and Irene Small Things Coastal, and they're bumbleberries as a contrast. And then I've got another version here in Mora faux leather. That one's from So Hot, and Lewis and Irene inside again. Unfortunately I can't remember the name of that range, but it's super cute, isn't it? On the faux leather version I've got a non-fusible fleece and Decaville heavy, so that one is very, very sturdy. As you can see, that keeps its shape really, really well. And in the quilting cotton version I've got a non-fusible fleece and Decaville light, so it is slightly less structured but still very, very sturdy. I'll show you what it looks like on, albeit my short stature, but got nice length shoulder straps there. It's a good size. I can see myself making these in many, many different fabrics because I think they'll be very useful. If you'd like to sew with me, and I hope you do, then please do tag me. I love to see what you make at themakespace.uk. But grab your supplies and let's get sewing. Right, the first thing we want to do is to cut our fabric to shape. So this is my exterior fabric in this nautical print. I'm using a non-directional print, so it doesn't really matter which way I have it. But if you've got directional fabric, then you're going to want to sew it together. So follow the instructions to cut two sections, sew it together, and press open your seam. And then what we're going to do is we're going to find the center. I've already found mine on the wrong side, so I'm just going to mark it on the right side. And then line up our template. So I'm using the long edge of my fabric. Okay, so not the short end edge, the long 28-inch edge. And I've lined up the center of my template with the center of my fabric, and just make sure that that's nice and even, and these short sides match the edge of your fabric there. Now you've got the choice. You can either pin this, put some weights on it, or you can just be a little bit gung-ho and cut into these shapes by holding it down. Your choice. So all I'm doing is cutting these two triangles away from the template. Like so. Okay, this is going to be our base, and this will form our darts to give our bag the shape. Now I can turn it around and do the same on the other side. I've marked my centre on the back again, so let's just mark that on the front. And then line up my template. This is exactly the same as I've done for my non-fusible fleece and my Deca Veil as well. We'll come on to that in a moment. I'm doing my exterior fabric at the moment, and we'll also look at the lining as well. Okay, lovely. So that's my exterior fabric prepared and ready. Okay, I'm going to pop this to one side for the moment and also cut the lining, and then we'll come back and add our stabilizers. So if you're using directional fabric, then you're going to want to follow this as well. So I'll cut 2 pieces of my lining fabric, and we're going to join them together with a 1/4 inch seam. We're going to leave a turning gap in the middle at the bottom of this lining. There's no need to baste across this turning gap, because this one we are going to close from inside the zip pocket. It would really help if I started to cut my rectangles straight, I think. Right, so I've lined up my longer edges, so across the width. So refer back to the cutting list if you need to double check what's the width and what's the height. And I'll just mark a turning gap. Right, so regular stitch length, I'm using a 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end, and the start and the end of my turning gap. So I'm going to back stitch at the start here now. And then so as far as my turning gap and back stitch, you can baste across it if you want, just to hold it together, but you don't need to at this point. And then at the start of my turning gap, or the other side, back stitch again. All the way to the end and back stitch. Okay. Now I would usually encourage you to press this seam open. However, we don't really want our turning gap seam to be open, so we're just going to press open the ends with my fingers. Just press that open as best I can without actually getting my iron out. Well, I will need my iron in a moment, so I might plug it in actually while we mention it. Thanks for the reminder. That can start heating up then. I'll just open the seams on this end as well. Okay, now we're going to do exactly the same as we did on our exterior, but for our lining. I'll line up the template with the centre of that seam. Make sure the edges are level. My template and my fabric. Cut that little triangle out. And the other side. Triangle there, lovely. And then we can flip it around and do the other side. I should have turned my mat over, I'm really sorry. I'll turn my mat over in a moment, just so we can see a little bit easier on this darker colour. That a little bit easier, that probably is, isn't it? I'm very sorry. Okay, so we'll do exactly the same on this one. I wonder if there's something I can do with these triangles. I've got a few triangles now in the studio. Might be something quite cool I could do with them. Or that could just go in the to-do pile, like lots of good ideas. Right, so I'm going to pop the line in to one side for the moment. That's nicely cut out and ready for use. And we'll retrieve our stabilisers because I just want to talk you through these. So I've got my non-fusible fleece and my Decaville. I did burn my Decaville because I was a little bit too keen. You can see in a few different spots that I was a little bit too keen on that one. So we'll just ignore that. What we're going to do, so as you can see, I've attached my Decaville onto my non-fusible fleece, and there's a 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimetre gap all the way around it. I'm going to get our exterior fabric and pop it right sides up on top. So we've got the Decaville sandwiched in between the fabric and the fleece. So you've got the fleece on the bottom, Decaville, and then the exterior fabric. My desk is not quite big enough, so I just want to double check that I've got everything lined up as it should be, more or less. And then I think I'm going to add a few pins just to hold this in place. We're going to baste around all of the edges of this one to keep it in place while we're sewing. You can change your stabiliser for pretty much anything you like. You can omit the stabiliser if you're using a fairly sturdy fabric, or you want to use it for just for storing your knitting or your projects or taking swimming. You might have a fairly sturdy waterproof canvas that doesn't really need the stabiliser, which is great because you also save money there on these stabilisers as well as time. Or you can swap to a foam, which would give you extra bounce, bit of extra stability. Or you can use Decaville Light or Decaville Heavy. In this one I'm using Decaville Light, and in the one that I showed you earlier I also used Decaville Heavy, just for a bit of extra sturdiness. Sometimes I quite like to swap and change my stabilisers and sort of play around with them a bit and see what kind of finishes I get. All right, we are going to baste this into place now. So we'll stay on the 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. I'm going to increase my stitch length to my longest stitch, which is basting stitch, and I'm going to sew it around the entire outside. So I'm going to start on one of these straight edges, sew to the corner, stop with my needle down and pivot, and then down to this first dart cutout, and then around the darts, and then carry on. So all edges, all sides will eventually be sewn. Doesn't matter if you skip or miss any bits, don't panic. We just want to hold everything in place while we're sewing it. Sorry, I've just had a thought. I haven't turned the sound off on my phone. I better had to do that. Okay. Don't like to be interrupted when I'm sewing something lovely. So I've just lifted my presser foot with my needle down, pivoted, and sew back along this straight edge. Oh, I've gone too far. That's what I get for speeding up a bit. I'll go back. And then pivot and sew along this dart edge. This is the trickiest bit. If you want to do the straight edges first and then come back to these dart points, you can. That does make it a little bit easier. Not sure if I need an extra stitch in there. Let's try. Oh, I know. I'll pivot, go straight, and then redirect Let's see if that helps me to get to the other dart arm. Yeah, perfect, there we go. And then pivot. This might take a while, so if you're bored easily, please do fast forward me. Pivot. I think that worked quite well actually, to do a couple of straight stitches across the point and then pivot. Of course, these are long basting stitches, so I can always remove them afterwards if they are visible. And then final long side, no, not final long side, nearly there. And pivot. Sorry, I'm trying to manoeuvre this and not catch my microphone, so I'm very sorry if it did catch. And pivot again. There's a lot of pivoting in this pattern. Maybe just at the start. I say that as though it's a surprise, as though I didn't design it. Always a surprise. Right, final arm of my dart and then the final side. And pivot and final side now. Oh no, it's not a final side. Oh gosh, I'm really getting ahead of myself. Got to carry on back to where I started. There we go. Right. Now, the reason, I should have told you this earlier, the reason that we've attached our fusible, so I've interfaced my fabric and then I've added my fusible decabil. The reason I've added my fusible stabilizer onto my fleece and then sewn it on is so that any wrinkles that occur when we are turning through, they'll be hidden on the inside between the layers of the bag, because I find that inevitably a fusible stabilizer does give wrinkles and it's very, very difficult to avoid them and then have to add extra pressing to remove them. So I think I might as well just accept that there are going to be wrinkles and control where they are seen. So that's why I add my fusible onto a sewing and then it's sandwiched in between. Right, so on the back of this panel now, all we're going to do is cut away the extra fleece from our seam allowances just up to that stitching line. So try not to go over your stitches. If you do, it doesn't really matter, just as long as you don't cut your exterior fabric. So I like to just hold my stabilizer back and with my scissors sort of almost flat, just give that a little trim. I can do it on all edges and that just helps to reduce a bit of bulk that's going to be going through the machine. And I find that your seams sit neater as well if you've reduced a little bit of bulk. I find that there isn't so much stopping your seams sitting out nice and flat. Again, I've failed to cut my rectangle straight, so I've missed a bit over there, but that's okay because that's mostly held in and it'll be sewn in properly when we do our construction. Now for these triangles or these darts, you'll do exactly the same. Just hold that stabilizer back as best you can and trim away as much as you can. I was going to go from that side, but I did go too far on that side. I had to reverse back a bit. I've gone for an awkward angle instead. Now this is also going to take some time, so please feel free to fast forward me. I much prefer trimming foam away from seam allowances because I find that fleece can sometimes split or tear while you're pulling it. We are getting there though. I think it's the darts that are take the time. I've seen more riveting videos. Must admit. It'll get more exciting in a minute, I'm sure. More exciting than trimming the stabilizers away. I said don't panic too much if you've got bits of stabilizer missing in tiny places. To be honest, I don't know if I've cut that or just think I haven't cut it. I think I've just got a bit short there or a bit wonky. But that's okay, that saves me a trim in that section. So I've just got my darts to do. Only a couple of sections here in my darts. There we go. Okay, lovely. Right, so our exterior panel is all ready and stabilized, cut out, ready to go. So we can pop that to one side for the minute. We're going to work on the lining first because that's the most arduous part, and then we can come back and have a quick finish then. Right, so we need our lining main panels that we've just sewn and cut. I'll turn my cutting mat over again. Could do with getting a colourful mat, really. I have got a grey mat, I'm sorry. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so we need a zip pocket. Now the zip and the slip pockets are both exactly the same size. They've just got different orientations. So mine is non-directional fabric, so mine I just cut the two together. Doesn't really matter. Oh dear, I've forgotten my ruler. I wonder if I've got a little ruler up here. No, I've got 4 rulers and they never seem to be in the right place at the right time. I'll go and get my ruler, and then when I come back we'll mark our zip pocket. Right, so what we're going to do on the wrong side of our pocket piece, I'll just mark the centres so that we've got those identified. Line everything up then nicely. So on the wrong side of your pocket piece, we're going to mark a box. Measurements are all on the pattern for you. So I'm just going to draw my bottom line of my box. This is 6 1/4 inches or 15 1/4 centimetres. I'm going to make the box 3/8 of an inch high, 1 centimetre if you're working in metric, and then that box is going to be 8 inches long. So what I'm going to do is my piece is 10 inches wide, so I'm just going to draw a line 1 inch in from each edge, and that should then be the 8 inches or 20.5 centimeters long, that box. Okay, lovely, perfect. We're going to draw a little triangle pointing in to the center from each short end, and then connect those with a line in the middle, like so. Okay, so there's our box. I'm going to pop this panel onto our lining main panel now. We're going to pop our lining main panel right sides up. Oh, let me change my mat over again. So we've got our lining main panel right sides up, and then I'm going to pop our zip pocket right side down, so they're right sides together at this point. We can line up the center, so I've got my center marked here, and I'm going to line that up on the center of the zip pocket piece, although you can always measure either side to make sure that it is centered as well. Now, when we couldn't quite think what word I wanted then, when we work out where we're going from our from the bottom, we're going from this center seam here, and obviously we've got our turning gap here in that center seam. So instead of going from the edge of the fabric, we're going to measure from the actual seam line. So we're going to place that 3.5 inches or 8.9 centimeters from the center bottom. So as I said, when we line up this 3.5 inches, I'm lining it up based on where this seam is. I should line up my centers as well while I'm doing that. And then I can pop my zip pocket panel in place, and then you can just double check the measurement either side of that to make sure that that is nice and even. And then I'm going to add a pin in each side just to hold that panel in place while we are sewing it. Now when we're sewing it, we are going to sew around the outside of this box that we've just drawn. So I'm probably going to start up here, just in from the corner, and I'm going to sew to the corner, and I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot, lower my presser foot and sew to this next corner, and do the same, pivot, and all the way around until I get back to the start. I'm going to start with my needle down so that if I need to adjust my hands or when I get to the corners, I can lift and pivot whilst leaving my needle down. Now as you get close to these corners, if you think you can't quite make it exactly to the corner with the stitch length that you're using, then just change your stitch length down to a teeny tiny little stitch length, get into that corner, sort of nibble away at it, and then increase your stitch length again to carry on. And that will just help us get really accurate into the corners there. All right, so we'll pop this under. And you can either back stitch or you can overlap a few stitches. I tend to overlap a few stitches on these zip boxes. So I'm sewing directly on the outside line that we've just drawn, that box. Right, so I've hit the corner, I've left my needle down, lifted my presser foot. Now I can pivot. I'm sewing down the short end. I think I'm on the corner there. We'll soon find out when we pivot if we need to go back. No, that's perfect. I don't know how I've managed that, because usually I do have to take a tiny stitch to get into the corner. Obviously this stitch length is working out pretty well for that corner. I could do with a teeny tiny stitch, so I'm just decreasing my stitch length. One tiny stitch into the corner. And now going back up to my regular stitch length that I was using. I need to decrease again, tiny stitch. It just helps you get right into those corners nice and neat. You end up with a neater finish then. Right, so I've just overlapped my stitches by a few and trim those threads. Okay. Right, let's remove those pins. I'm going to take that centre pin out for the moment as well. I'll pop it back in again later. So I'm retrieving my pressing mat. And I'm going to steam press these stitches first, just to help them really set into the fabric and get a nice neat finish on this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the zip pocket up and push with my iron against that seam and then pull it down and do the same. And these short side edges as well. Right, I'm not finished with my pressing bits yet. I'm just going to put them to one side for the moment. Now we want to cut through this centre line and the arms of the triangles. So first of all, I'm going to cut through this centre line really, really, really carefully to the point of the triangles. And then I'm going to cut down the arms of each triangle as close as I can get to the stitches in the corner without actually cutting into those corner stitches. And again this end as well. Now the closer you get, the neater you will find your finish will be, but obviously if you snip into those stitches you can find that your stitching comes undone. So just try and go as close as you can. And then we're just going to pop this pocket piece through to the wrong side, like so. Although you still want to work on your piece on the lining main panel side. So don't flip it over just yet. So after you've posted your pieces through, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a finger roll here along this one edge to make sure that my zip pocket panel can't be seen peeking through. Just give it a little press from the right side. If you find that your panel is peeking through, just tug on your zip pocket piece a little bit and encourage it to sit to the back. And then I'm going to do the same on this bottom edge. Just going to tug it down from underneath. So I'm just gently rolling that seam to the back. We don't want to see our zip pocket peeking, unless you've got a contrast zip pocket that you'd really like a little peeking contrast around the outside of this zip box, in which case you probably do want a little bit peeking out. So as I come to these short edges, I've just tugged it from the back and then quickly whacked the iron on. I find if you press from the right side, then any creases will be hidden inside your zip pocket. I find that there are always creases when you do a zip pocket of this kind. So if you press from the right side, at least you're controlling where the creases are. So if you can see on the wrong side, you can see them in these corners there. So we've managed to manage, guess that works, where those creases are. Right, so now we're working on the wrong side of our zip pocket. I'm going to turn it around to face me. And we need some double-sided tape. We're going to add some tape to the top and bottom of that box. Now, I accidentally dropped my tape on the floor and it's a little bit thready, which suggests that I could maybe do with bringing the vacuum up into the filming room. I do try and aim for the bin, but it does get a little bit thready sometimes. Right, so we just add a line of tape to the top and bottom of this box. And the reason we do it to the box and not the zip is so that if you miss a line slightly, it doesn't matter. You're not going to see any tape peeking through that box on the zip. Right, now this is the hardest part for me, I find, is getting the backing off of the tape. This is not my usual brand of, well, it is my at the moment because I bought 6 rolls of it, but this is the last of this tape for me, fortunately. It's very lovely and sticky, but very hard to get the backing paper off. Right, what we're going to do then is we've got our zip. Decide which way you want your zip pull to be facing once it's in the lining. So I like to open my zip like this from left to right once my zip pocket is installed. So I'm going to flip it over and pop it in this way, because in theory when I turn my panel over, I'm just going to very, very gently add that. Now I'm going to flip it over now. Should be the right way round. And because I've only gently stuck it in, I can reposition it slightly to make sure that that zip is sort of centered through this opening here. It's not quite there, so you can just pull this bit away from the zip, reposition it. Okay, now we're going to sew around the outside of the box again. I'm going to increase my stitch length this time to a slightly more attractive top stitching stitch length. I'm probably going to start down here in the opposite place to where I started before, and we're going to sew around the outside of this zip box opening. I'm going to sew about 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from the edge. Make sure that everything's still completely flat as it goes under your presser foot. And I'll pop it under, and as we get to the corners I'm going to do exactly the same if I need to decrease my stitch length just to get around these corners. So I'm starting on my needle down again so that I can reposition my hands if I need to. Right, so I've hit where I think is the corner. I've lifted my presser foot and pivot. I'm just going to double check. Yes, I'm happy with it where that is. If not, I could always unpivot. I don't know if there's a word for unpivot. Don't know, and reposition it anyway. Okay, so I'm a little bit bunched up here now. So I'm just making sure that everything is flat under the presser foot. Now I'm coming up to my zip pull, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my needle down, lift my presser foot and just wiggle that zip pull out of the way, lower my presser foot and continue. Right. Let's see if we're in the right place here. Yep. That's great. And pivot back onto this bottom edge. Now, as I come back towards where I started, I'm just going to pull on my bobbin thread at the back there, and you'll see a little loop forming. If you tug on that little loop, then your top thread will come through to the back of the panel, and we can tie that off then, just so that from the right side it looks nice and neat and you can't see where you've secured your thread. I'll just snip that off, and then I'll continue back to where I started. And my zip pull is here, so what I'm going to do before I get to the end, just move my zip pull out of the way again, and then I know that's definitely not going to cause any problems. Okay, so I've overlapped a couple of stitches there. I'm going to cut my thread tails quite long, and again tug on my bobbin thread to pull my top thread through to the back, and just tie these off. Lovely, there we go. Now before we do anything else, we're going to open our zip halfway, and we're going to leave, or at least halfway, and we're going to leave it like that, don't touch it. Then on the wrong side, I'm going to pull the zip pocket down to meet the bottom. Okay, so if I pulled it all the way down like that, there's a bit of a difference, but it also means that anytime I put anything in my pocket, it would pull down on this main lining panel. So there's a little bit of wiggle room built in, so we're just going to match the bottom edges of our pocket pieces together like so, and then I'm going to add a couple of pins to hold them together. I'm only pinning through these pocket piece layers. Now we're leaving a gap in the bottom here, not to turn through, but to close the turning gap. So we've left our turning gap in the lining main panels here, and then we'll need to close that turning gap later on. So this is why we're leaving a gap in the zip pocket. Okay, so I'm pinning all the way up, and again I'm still just pinning these pocket piece layers together. Okay, now when you sew these, you are only sewing the pocket piece layers together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip my panel over and pull the lining out of the way. So I'm going to start here and sew down. I'm going to back stitch where I start, and I'm going to sew down to the corners and then back stitch at the start of the turning gap. So I'll probably start here, back stitch, sew down to the corner, pivot, sew to the start of this turning gap and back stitch. Then I'm going to increase my stitch length up to my longest basting stitch length and sew across this turning gap, decrease back down to my regular stitch length and do some back stitching here at the other end of the turning gap. Sew to the corner, pivot, and sew back up to the top and back stitch. So I'll have back stitching at the tops here and at the start and end of the turning gap, regular stitching around the sides, and a bit of basting stitching along the bottom there. Okay, that will help us to close our turning gap really neatly later on. So I'm going to start with my needle down, back stitching, and then sewing down the edge, just pulling my lining main panels out of the way so they don't interfere with what I'm doing. So I'm sewing as far as the corner, lift my presser foot, pivot, put my presser foot back down again, bit of back stitching again, increase my stitch length to a basting stitch, sew across this turning gap and decrease my stitch length again, and some back stitches. Continue to the corner, lift the presser foot and pivot. I sound like I'm doing an exercise class here. And then back up this last side and back stitching at the end. And I've lost a pin, so I'll take that out of the way before I lose that in my machine. All right, there we go. So we can trim the threads. And take these pins out. Okay, lovely. So I'm going to leave my basting stitches in, and this will leave behind a lovely line of stitch holes for us to follow when we come to close that turning gap at the end of construction. Okay, that's our zip pocket done. Double check that your zip is still halfway open. We're going to move on to our slip pocket next. Okay, so for the slip pocket, we've got the exact same size piece of fabric, but this one will be at 90 degrees. If you are using directional fabric, you will have cut this at 90 degrees. I'm using non-directional fabric, so I've just cut two together. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold this lengthwise, so we've got a long rectangle, and we're just going to clip this together around these three sides like so. I'm going to sew around all three sides, but we're going to leave a turning gap in this one. And let's move that up. We are going to baste across this turning gap just so that we get a nice neat finish when we come to close that up. So what we're going to do, I need to, sorry, my sewing machine just had a moment. Ta-da! There we go, that's better. Okay, so we're going to use our regular stitch length, and we're going to sew all the way around all three sides, but we're going to leave a turning gap here. We're going to baste across this turning gap. So we're going to back stitch at the start, sew down to here, back stitch here, go over here with a basting stitch, long basting stitch, go back down to our regular stitch length and back stitch here, sew to the corner, back up to the top and back stitch here. So I'll talk you through as I do it. We're using our regular stitch length, regular seam allowance. So I'm back stitching to start with, and then I'm leaving my needle down, lifting my presser foot and pivoting, and then as I come to the start of the turning gap, just do a few back stitches here, increase my stitch length all the way up, and so across there, back down to my regular stitch length and back stitch, to the corner, pivot, and then back stitch at the end. Okay. Now we're going to reduce some of the bulk out of these corners. So what we're going to do is, I'll just get my slightly larger scissors, they're a little bit easier for doing these corners with. We're going to take the corner off at a diagonal, and then we're also going to take a long triangle into the seam allowance either side, just to reduce the bulk right down, and again in the top there, and main triangle and long triangle extra and a bit extra there. That just helps it to sit nice and neat when we turn it right sides out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is grab my ironing mat or my pressing mat And we're going to press these basting stitches first, just to really help them set into the seam. And then I'm going to fold these seam allowances back and give those a press just over this basting that we've got here for the turning gap. That will make it a little bit easier to get a nice neat finish on the bottom then when we turn it through. Okay, so we can take these basting stitches out now. This should leave behind a lovely neat line of stitch holes that we can follow when we're closing this turning gap. Okay, so I'll reach in, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to push my thumb against the corner and then use my forefinger to push against that corner, and it just helps that to turn through really nice and neat. And the same in that bottom corner, and then the same in the other two corners. And turn this all the way through. Oh dear, sorry about that. I think there's a car alarm just went off outside. The joys of having a studio in a town centre, I guess. Right, now I'm looking for my spoon, but I don't think I've got my spoon. So I shall use my sewing machine screwdriver and just very, very, very gently, obviously a spoon is better, push into those corners, make sure they sit out nice and proud. And the same in these two corners. Right, we're ready to give this a nice press then. So I think you can see I'm slightly buckled in on that seam, so we'll just give it a little finger roll and then a press. That's better. And the same on this end. And hang on, I should have probably finger rolled that section as well, so we'll roll that section. And then that last section on the bottom there. And then we can go ahead and press all the way over this pocket. Okay. Pop that away. Now I'm going to increase my stitch length to a top stitching stitch length, which for me is just a slightly longer stitch length, and I'm going to sew across the entire top. That's the top folded edge of this pocket. Okay. And then we can retrieve our lining piece, which I think has just fallen on the floor for me. Okay. And I've pinned my zip pocket up out of the way. And we're going to pop our slip pocket on top of our lining main panel, the same panel that we have our zip pocket attached to. Oh, I've got a stray thread there. There we go. Find the centre so that I can try and line these up and not have a wonky pocket. I suspect in the grand scheme of things nobody would really notice, but I like to try at least. Right, so we're measuring 3 inches or 7.5 centimetres, I think. Let me just double check my pattern. Yes. And we're going from that centre seam, lining up my middle, my centre. Line up the centre of my pocket, make sure that's completely flat and even. And I'll just add a couple of pins for the moment because I want to divide this. Now the measurements for my divisions are in the pattern, but you can divide yours however you think is best, however you're going to use your pocket most. So I've added 2 inches from the side for a pen pocket, and then I find that 5 or 6 inches, 5 is 12.5 centimeters, 6 inches is, I think it's about 15.25 off the top of my head. 2 inches is 5 centimeters, I know that. So if you're working in metric, you might want to just double check my suggestions. Right, so what we are going to do, we're going to start sewing at the top corner here and backstitch. I'm going to sew to the bottom and pivot, sew along to this first line and sew up the first line, backstitch back down the that first line, along the bottom to the next line, so up that next line, backstitch and pivot and come back down again, along the bottom to the corner, pivot and back up to the top. I'm going to be sewing with a 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge of this pocket piece, and at the tops where I'm doing my back stitching, I'm going to do a good solid secure back stitch, so a couple of back stitches there. This is a stress point on your bag, so make sure you've got enough reinforcement for whatever you're going to be carrying in your pockets. Okay, so along that bottom edge to the line, lift up the presser foot and pivot. I always like to start on my needle down so that I can readjust my hands if needed. Right, so we're near the top, a couple of back stitches, press a foot up and pivot back so that we can go back down that original line of stitching. That just adds a bit of extra reinforcement and also is a little bit neater. Not quite at the bottom where I need to be, so I've just decreased my stitch length and taken a tiny stitch. Pivot, make sure everything's nice and flat as it goes under the presser foot. So as far as this next line and pivot. And up this next line all the way to the top, a couple of back stitches again, pivot again, and we're going back down that original line. And then we're going to pivot. Sew to the corner, pivot, and then going up this last edge now. Some good back stitching there for extra reinforcement, and that's our pocket attached. Just trim these threads, keep everything nice and neat. And before I forget, I'm going to add my label into the side seam here. I'll add a pin to hold that in place while we're sewing. Okay, lovely. Right, so we can unpin the zip pocket. Now if you want to add a fastening or a closure, now's the time to do it. There's no closure in this pattern. It's a open top tote, so if you want to add one, now's a great time to do it. Right, now we're going to form the base by sewing our darts. Just check the pattern, I haven't missed anything. So what we're going to do, you can choose which side or which edge you do first. It really is up to you. All we're going to do is just fold the panel over, matching these dart lines. And just add a little pin or two to hold it in place. I might sew with this seam up so I can keep an eye on that. Now we're going to stop sewing 1/2 inch from the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark on my panel. So I'm measuring 1/2 inch along that angle. So if you measured it straight, that does come to around about nearly 3/4 ish. Might as well mark it on the other side while I'm here. Lovely, right. So all we're going to do, we're going to sew using the regular seam allowance. Let me double check I haven't missed anything. Yeah, lovely. We're going to sew from this end here to that mark. We're going to backstitch at both ends. So regular construction length, stitch length, and our regular 3/8 inch seam allowance. You can mark this on your fabric if you find it easier. Okay, so we're sewing as far as that mark and then a couple of back stitches. And then, now it depends which order you want to do this. You can either sew the other side and then snip, or you can snip and then sew the other side. I'm going to snip first. So all I do is pop my scissors into that little corner point and snip almost as far as that stitch in there. Okay, you can press these seam allowances open if you've got an ironing board handy. You can press those open so they sit nice and neat. It doesn't matter if you don't know, just give them a good finger press. And then all we're going to do is exactly the same on the other side or the other arm of this dart. We're going to try and ignore that first half. So I'm going to match up the point first and add a pin. And then flatten out that dart to there. And this time I think I'm going to start from this end. So I'm going to start from my 1/2 inch mark. If I can spot it, there it is. You might crisscross over your original sewing, so don't panic if you do. Back stitching at the start. Follow that regular seam allowance all the way to the end of the dart, the full end of the dart. Don't stop midway, so stop at where the fold is. And then snip into that seam allowance as well. And if you can, give that a little press. If not, just a finger press is great. Okay, let's see. I don't want to confuse you, so let's see what the pattern says. Right, let's do the other dart first and then we'll do the side. Okay, so this is what our bottom looks like at the moment. We've got this beautiful angled corner there. I say beautiful, it's very beautiful. I suppose as beautiful as an angled corner can be. Let's mark our 1/2 inch on here before we get started pinning. A little bit easier. And what you can do is go in your 3/8 of an inch, which might make it a little bit easier for those of you who aren't so good at visualising where it is. It's always a bit tricky with seam allowances extra on, isn't it? Right. Oh, I've got my thumb stuck in my scissors, sorry. Keeping it classy there, Samantha. Right, so we're going to pin, as we did before, just pinning the end and then along that dart. Just want to make sure that this section is folded nice and neat, because it's this folded edge that we want to be where we start sewing from. And back stitch, and then remember to stop at that mark, 1/2 inch from the end. Little trim. And snip into the seam allowance, just the tip there, okay? Just the tip of that dart we are snipping into, and then line up this second half. This really is just a case of joining the edges and it will form that triangle. I'll start at this end this time, starting at that mark, and I'm going to back stitch and then make sure this folded edge is nice and flat as we come to it. There we go. And snip into the seam allowance. Lovely, so we should have 2 sets of darts in there, which will form our base. Okay. Now we're going to sew down the sides. I'm going to do it this way actually, because I've got this extra pin in there with my my label. Now when we sew these sides, we're going to pull this little triangle from the dart. So what we've sewn in the bottom, the end is unsewn, so we're just going to pull that out of the way and match up the bottom edge of the side seam, and then match it up as best you can. It's better to match the bottom than it is the top, so I've got a slight difference there, so I'll trim that off afterwards, but it is better to match the top. And we are going to use our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew from the bottom to the top, and your little triangle should in theory be out of the way at the moment, just pulled back ever so slightly. We're sewing all the way to the top. Give that a little trim, just those extra threads. You can take these pins out. I'm going to take my pin out from my label. If you find that you have got a little bit of extra bagginess when you come to put it together later, you can always just start sewing in the seam allowance and veer out slightly into a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then come back in again. Right, let me just have a little sneaky peek how that looks inside. Gosh, it looks great. There you go, we've got a lovely little V seam there. V seam? Y seam maybe. It's probably more likely a Y, although I suppose because to me it's upside down, looks like a V. Angled seam we'll call it. Here we are, making up names for things all over the show here. Just open those seam allowances for a moment. That'll help later on. So I'm just going to pin that open. If I had the inclination, I could get my ironing board out and press those seam allowances open. Right, so I've just pinned the bottom of the side seam and evened it out with the top. Okay, we're going to sew exactly the same as we did before. 3/8 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance. And all the way to the top. Trim these threads. Oh, another pin in there. Let's take that pin out. Double check that you're all happy and okay with what's inside. Check it looks nice and neat. You've got your turning gap open at the bottom. Great. Okay, let me pin these side seams open here just so that that can sit while we're working on the exterior. Right, the lining's complete. We can pop that to one side and get started on our exterior. Right, onto our exterior, we're going to work on our handles first. These are the long pieces, and I have cheated slightly. I've already folded my long edges into the centre before I came up to film, so I'm ahead a step with that. Right, I'm just going to put one of them to one side for the moment to work on one at a time. So I need 2 rings per handle. I'm using Emmeline hardware, and what we're going to do is we're going to thread 2 rings onto the handle. If they've got a right side, the rings, make sure the right sides are facing, and then make sure your handle is not twisted. Let me see if I can get this all in shot. There we go, not twisted. And then open, or with the ends open, just match up these short ends together. You can double check that it's not twisted at this point as well. Okay, then we're gonna sew these ends together using 1/4 of an inch or 6mm seam allowance. Using our regular construction stitch length and back stitching at the start and the end. I'm going to cheat or trick myself, or try and trick myself, that handles are not my least favourite part. I just find them so boring. I'm going to do both together if I can. Doesn't really matter about your rings at the moment because we can always twist those around before we finish up. So just make sure that short ends are together and that's not twisted. And we'll do exactly the same on this one. 1/4 of an inch or 6mm seam allowance on the end, back stitching at the start and the end. Trim a few threads here. There we go. Right, so we're just going to press or finger press this seam open. And then we're going to refold this into the centre. Where you've got the seam there, you might want to add a little pin just to hold that in place. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew around the whole loop using a 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance, and we're just going to move the rings out of the way as we sew. Now whatever stitch length you use, make sure to make a note of it. Oh, actually I could sew this edge first, couldn't I? And then that will keep my seam allowances in place. Good thinking, me. Okay. Right, now this is going to be very boring for you, but basically all I'm doing is sewing around the entire loop on one side with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Stitch a couple of stitches. I knew I was coming to the end because I got spiked by that pin that I left in. Well done for that idea, Samantha. Okay, so I'm just trimming the threads from the right side and then from the wrong side. And I'm gonna turn it over and do exactly the same on the other long edge. This will be exactly the same as I've just done, and just as exciting. Or it's slightly more exciting because my rings got tangled. As we come back to the start, I'm just going to overlap a couple of stitches. And trim these extra threads off. Okay. That was more boring for me than it was for you, I'm sure. Well, I don't know about that actually. It was probably more boring for you. At least I had the excitement of the pin spiking me, which I will repeat on my second handle, just for a bit of added peril. I always think these films that we watch are always more exciting with a little bit of peril. So I guess I'm just, I don't know, following a great formula. Right, so exactly the same as we did for the last one, 1/4 inch or 6mm away from the edge. Clearly I'm learning something here because my pin is in the other direction. So I didn't know I was approaching the end because I didn't get spiked. Still worked it out though, so that's okay. Right, and the last side on this one. That's not the last of the sewing on these handles, unfortunately. Not quite sure why I have such an aversion to handles and straps. Don't know, I think it's just a repetitive sewing maybe, who knows. It's probably a good theory in there somewhere. And you would be well within your rights to ask the question, why have I designed a bag with such long handles when I could have done an easier method? And that would be a very valid question, and one I am asking myself now. Right, so what we're going to do, decide where you want your seam first. You can either have it in the middle of your handle or under one of the rings, your choice entirely. On my last one I did it in the middle, so I think this one I'm going to put it under one of the rings. So all we do is flatten that bit out and add a clip, and then sort of smooth this out and add a clip at the other end. And then I'm just going to keep clipping all the way along, making sure that my edges are all nicely lined up. Okay, great. I think I'll sew this one before we come to the next one. So all we're going to do is sew along one long edge, along the short edge, along the long edge and the short edge back to where we came from, using a 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance. The only difference is we are going to stop sewing 3/4 of an inch, or let me tell you what that is in centimetres, 2 centimetres away from the ring, because that's where it gets a bit tight with the presser foot and you can end up with wobbly wibbly stitches. So just make a little mark on your handle, 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimetres away from the ring. Don't worry though if you think that's quite a big gap, because you can add a rivet to secure it a bit further in. I'll add an extra clip in there, there we go. Okay, right, so I'm going to start somewhere very random, probably in the middle. As you're sewing, just make sure that your edges are all lined up, your top and bottom edges of fabric are all nicely lined up. We're sewing it 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. Okay, so as we come towards that line, I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot, and sew across that line, lift my presser foot and pivot, and then carry on down the other side. To my second line, lift my presser foot, pivot along that line and pivot. Just pulling my thread through on this bit here at the back, so that I can tie it off. trim. And then I'm going to carry on. There we go. Perfect. Well, not perfect, but good enough. Done. Done is always better than perfect, isn't it? Right, that's one handle done. So I'm going to repeat exactly the same for this second one. And I will line up my seam under a ring as I did the first one. If I can find the seam. There it is. That seems pretty well aligned. Add a clip in there and flatten it out, make sure it's not twisted. And my ring at the other end. Just give it a little tug lengthwise to make sure that that's evenly distributed, nice and flat. And then some clips. Just trying to keep my layers nice and even. Right. And then we're going to sew this exactly the same as we did for the first one. No, hang on. I know what I've forgotten to do. Can you work it out? I've forgotten to make my mark. Oh, and actually my ring has twisted there. Let me put it that way so that it hides the join. Let's make our mark to show us where to stitch across. And on this end as well. That was a close one, wasn't it? I was going to have to guesstimate as I came towards it then. That would have been quite stressful, I'm sure. For me, not for you. Unless you're the kind of person who is emotionally invested in my video tutorial, in which case I would like to say thank you very much. Right, exactly the same as we did before. 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. Around all 4 sides along those lines that we've just sewn. Try and keep these layers aligned as they come under the presser foot. Well, not quite at the lines. Let's take a teeny tiny stitch. Okay. Going back to where we started. We trim these threads. And that's our handles sewn, which is great. Actually, it was less boring with you here as company, so I'm very happy about that. Thank you very much. Right, lovely. Okay, we could pop these to one side just for a moment, and we're going to get our overlays out. And I have cheated on these ones and folded my long edges into the centre already. There we go, so I've skipped a step there. Now we're going to sew using a 1/4 inch seam allowance from each long edge. You don't need to backstitch on these ones. So I'm just using my same top stitch and stitch length and just sewing 1/4 inch away from the edge. Feeding these in one after the other, really, just to minimise any chance of any bumble bunching at the starts. There we go, lovely. Okay, so we are sewn in at 1/4 inch. Let's check I haven't missed anything. No, okay. Right, what we need now is both overlays wrong sides up. So that's my folded side up. So I've got both overlays and one handle. And I'm going to make sure that I've got my, I don't know if I've got a pretty side and a not pretty side on this, but if you have, make sure your pretty side is right sides down. I'm going to fold the overlay through a ring on a handle. We're going to fold that through by 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimetres. Oh, how's that for a guess? Very nearly. Like so. I'll click that. You can add a dab of glue to that if you like. And then making sure that my handle isn't twisted. Trying to get this in the shot without losing it off the edge of the table. We're going to do the same with the other end of the handle and the second overlay. Right, lovely. Okay, then, so we've got one handle attached to 2 overlays. We can pull that up and then we get our second handle. And again, if it's got a pretty side, make sure the pretty side is down. And we're going to fold the other end of the overlays through the second handle. There we go, by 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimetres. And just keep an eye that nothing is twisted. As we're doing this, I think that needs a little bit more. There we go. Okay, right, now it does suggest in the pattern that you add a dab of glue. If you're using quilting cottons, you can choose to just use a bit of double-sided tape if you want, which I might do because it might be a little bit quicker. Not sure if it will hold quite as well, so let's have a go and see. add that in there. In between those layers. My main issue with this tape is that it's jolly hard to get the backing off. Perfect, there we go. Okay, that is pretty secure actually on my cotton. So you should have one giant loop now made up of your handles and your overlay. Handles and your overlays. Should be 2 overlays in the mix here. And 2 handles. I just want to make sure that that's all still lined up as I'm adding this tape. I nearly had that on the first time there. Pulling that backing paper off. Very nearly, but not quite, and now it's proving to be double tricky. Just making sure those edges are nicely lined up. Okay. I think, yeah, we haven't done this one yet. Nearly had to pause and rewind and rewatch myself to see which one we hadn't done yet. If you are using glue, you don't need very much, just a little dab of it is good. Just hold everything in place. Okay, lovely. Right, so we've constructed our overlays and handles. All that we need to do now is attach them onto our exterior, which may be easier said than done on this small table, but we'll give it a go. Right, so grab hold of your exterior fabric. Here we go. Okay. Now we're going to mark our centres. I did have it marked on the outside, on the exterior, top and bottom. Let's do it on the right side as well. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to mark where the centre is in the middle as well. I'm just going to stick a pin in there. Unfold it and then add a little chalk mark there. Although it does kind of blend in with my fabric, so I might have to actually add the pin there after all. Right, lovely. Now we are going to pop these with a 6-inch gap, 15 centimetres, between each overlay. Okay. So let's work on one side to start with. And we've got our centre mark. So in theory, that means that we should have 3 inches either side of the centre mark. In theory. Let's hope that's straight. It's a bit hard to have that straight, isn't it? Let's try and line it up from the top. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to draw a line. So that's 3 inches from the centre, that line. Oh, hang on, I need a bit more pencil. And then line up my 6-inch mark on that line, and that will be where the second handle goes. It's sort of visible-ish. You don't need to go all the way to the top, actually. I should have said that, because your handles won't go all the way to the top. Right, so we've got our centre there, and then 3 inches either side. We've got our 6-inch gap. And have we got our centre from the point? Line that up on there. There's our centre. Please use a chalk marker that you know will definitely come out. Something that will not stain your fabric or bleach your fabric after you've removed it. Okay, right, lovely. So I've got our placement, or we've got our placements, and I'm going to add some tape just along the outside edge of those lines. So we've got 6 inches in between, and I'm adding some tape on the other side of that line. And in typical fashion, my tape has torn in 2 pieces, so this could be fun. Trying to remove the backing paper, we'll see. I guess at least it should be sticky enough. If you would prefer to use glue, which if I was using faux leather, then I would definitely be using glue instead of tape, then just do exactly the same on the outside side of the line. So not on the 6-inch middly bits. Oh no! Oh, I'm tearing my tape off. There we go. Right. I'll do the other side in a moment. Now we need the overlay, or one of the overlays. Need to find the middle first. So fold it in half, rings together, and find the middle of that overlay, which is there. And line that up with the centre and with the edge of the overlay on that line that we have marked, that 6-inch gap between them. Okay, that looks fine on that side, so we'll swivel around and do the other side. Now at this point you probably want to double check that your handle is not twisted. It's in one sort of neat loop. There we go. Lovely, that's not twisted. And then we'll add some tape here, or some glue if you've got it. I would recommend glue if you're using something a little bit shinier than cotton. I'm using this absolutely beautiful print from Lewis and Irene, and I just love it because I live near the sea anyway. It's just lovely. I love the sea. It's a beautiful print to use, I think. Oh, my backing paper is torn. Not doing very well with this tape today. I wonder if it's the heat. It's very, very, very warm in the studio today. In fact, I can't tell you how warm it is because I deliberately haven't got my thermometer in case it told me something scary, a scary temperature. Could be why, or it could just be that I need to buy some new tape. Which, let's face it, could be the case. Right, so we'll find our centre of this overlay as well. And line that up nicely with the centre and that line. So we should have our 6 inches, 15 centimetres between the overlays, and your handles should be in a nice loop, not twisted or anything odd like that. Okay, now I'm going to turn it sideways slightly so I can put my extension table on, because I will find that easier. If you're using glue, you probably want to leave it overnight to set, but because I'm using tape, time is somewhat of the essence with tape, so I'm just going to crack on with the tape and tidy up a little bit now, because I've got all my bits and pieces here and I need the space for the table. There we go. Oh, I've lost my thread tails. There we go. Okay, right. Let's pop that up on there then. Now I'm going to top stitch these into place 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge, and I'm going to stop 3/4 of an inch from the rings. So same as the handles. So we'll just mark that. Do you know what? I'm gonna start and I'll mark the other one as I come close to it, because I don't want to risk knocking my fabric out of place. So I'm actually going to start in the middle at the bottom. I'm starting with my needle down and I'm using my top stitching stitch length, and I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge. Got everything nice and flat as it goes under the presser foot. And I'm coming up to my line. I'm just going to take a couple of nibbly stitches. Just one nibbly stitch actually was enough. And then pivot. I'm just making sure that my handle is sitting sort of parallel to my overlay, just so that that top bit of the overlay gets sewn nice and straight. Okay, pivot. You can fold your fabric how you need to at this point to get it under the machine. Take my scissors off my machine because I can see them going flying. Now I didn't do my line at this end, so let's go ahead and do that now before I get any closer to it. In there, so I'll stick that into my fabric just so I can spike myself with it later. Take a little nibbly stitch and pivot. Just want to make sure that everything is all nice and neatly lined up. That's why I like my my extension table for doing large things like this, because I think when you have them flat they don't wiggle out of line so much. Now before I go back up the other side, I'm going to pull my top thread through by pulling on my bobbin thread on the back there. You get a little loop. I'm just going to pull that through and tie it off. I'm right, I did spike myself on that pin. Why do I do it? Don't know. There we go. Let me tie that off. And then that's out of the way. I'll take that pin out now. Right, so from here then I can pivot and sew back down to where we were. Brilliant. Right, I'm not actually going to bother taking this out of the machine. I'm just going to slide it over to start sewing on the other side. And I'll learn from my lesson and put that pin straight in the pin cushion. Right, so we're doing exactly the same on this overlay. And pivot at that line. Make sure everything's nice and straight. And a little nibbly stitch and pivot. Oh, I forgot to change my stitch length up. Let's hope nobody notices that. I thought it was very slow stitching. Okay, so just make sure that tail is tucked in underneath the overlay. Oh, I forgot to do my line quickly. Oh dear. This is a bit awkward, isn't it? There we go. That was terrible. Little nibbly stitch, and this time try and remember to change back up to my top stitching stitch length. Right, I'm going to sew across this last minute line. Little nibbly stitch. For some reason I can't, sometimes I don't have to take little tiny stitches at all, and then sometimes I have to do them on every corner. I'm just going to fold all these bits in. Okay, right, hang on, I lost my scissors. There we go. Let's snip these threads. I'm going to take my extension table off now as well. Might need that again later. For now I'll put it behind me where it hopefully won't fall over. Right. Let's snip that there. Turn it over and see what we can pull through. Snip that there. I can see a little top thread loop. There we go. I can tie those off. It's in at this point when you're looking at the pure white fleece on the back with your dark grey stitching that you identify all of your wonky stitches and slightly uneven lines. So it's a great opportunity to appreciate busy fabric. There we go. How's that for making an opportunity out of a problem? Okay, so I'm just pulling these threads through to the back as well. I'm going to try and tie all 4 of these together. Great. Okay, let's check if any of these other loose threads can be evicted. Yes, I'm great at having lots of loose threads everywhere, so that's a good skill of mine. Now, if you want to add feet, at this point we're going to add some holes for our feet, and if you would like to add rivets, we'll add rivets now. So for rivets, we'll go through all layers, the overlay and the exterior fabric. For handles, if you want to add rivets, we'll add them just to the handles. For feet, we'll go through all layers. I just need to nip round to the other side of the table and get my big wooden mat. Okay, sorry for that. I'll put my wooden board underneath. Now we need to mark where our feet are going to go to start with. No, we don't. We need to do our rivets first. Let's read the pattern. Rivets first. Now, you could measure these, or you could take the artistic route, and this is what I do. I'm using M-line rivets, and what I tend to do is get one of the caps and pop it in place where I think, and just press down to leave a little indent, and then mark that as that's where my hole is going to be. Except I'm going to use a pencil because my white pencil is not marking so well there. Okay, and then the same on the other side. And as I said, I don't measure these, I just go by how it looks, because I think sometimes if it looks even, that's better than it being even, which is, if you've ever put a curtain pole up in the UK, you will understand instantly what I mean by that. So quite often our homes are not straight in the UK, and you might put a curtain pole up straight, but the ceiling might not be straight, so your curtain pole will look wonky if you put it plumb. Right, dab of fray check into those 2 holes. If you are new to rivet setting, please have a look at my channel for my rivet masterclass, where I taught you through all about rivets and how to use them. Just pushing these ones through. Move those out of the way before I knock them, and I'm going to set these 2 before I go any further. I've got my setter on that side. There we go. Now, if like me, you need to fold your fabric into your rivet setter, just make sure you have everything flat and even under the dies as you set them. Just set this second one. Make sure that's nice and nestled in there. There we go. Put that to one side for the moment while I do the other two. And as before, I'm going to use my very scientific and technical method of measuring for these rivets. I'm not going to do the handles. I don't think they need them really on this because it's a continuous loop. If you want to add it for extra bling, then you are very welcome. And usually I would jump at the chance to add any extra bling. But as I said, it is rather warm in the studio today, so I am happy to add rivets at a later date if I cool down a bit. So I'm just marking my placement. And this is a Japanese hand punch that I'm using. Don't need to hammer, and it's very quiet. You literally just push down in through the fabric. Dab of fray check. And some rivets. Oh, have I might have failed to go through all of my layers there because I was too busy talking about how wonderful my punch is that I didn't actually go all the way through my layers. There we go, that's better. I think I might have actually gone into the wood there with that one. Yeah, that's definitely through. Add my cap. And this one, add my cap. And then we'll set these. And the last rivet for now. There's nothing to say that I'm not going to come back and add them to the handles, and actually you could add them all the way down the overlays like I have on the Jangles anchor bag as well. That would be very, very nice, and add an extra little bit of a blingy feature. I can just hear my previous retreat guests being very confused that I haven't added extra rivets, because my famous saying at retreat is, if in doubt, stick a rivet in it. But I think the extra heat must be getting to me slightly, probably. Okay. Oh, I needed that board. Oh dear. As I said, the heat might be getting to me. We're going to mark our foot placement. Foot placement? Feet placement. I've never heard bag feet called a bag foot. Although it would be a bag foot, wouldn't it? Right, so we are going to add these through the overlays, 1.5 inches from the centre, which is there. That's there, so I'm just going to mark on my overlays, and then I'm going to put them directly in the centre widthwise of my overlays. So I'll measure 3 inches from that first set, which is of course 1.5 inches from the centre. So 1.5 inches is 3.8 centimetres. And I'll need my punch back again. I'm literally just lining it up in the centre of the overlays on those marks that we've made. Whoops, that was definitely into the wood then as well. Right. Just going to, I think it might be sensible to double check that I've gone all the way through by popping a pin in and giving it a little wiggle, because I don't want to get to adding my feet at the very end and find I haven't gone all the way through. Right, those are fine. So we'll add a dab of fray check to those holes, because we're not going to add our feet until near the very end. So we want to make sure that that doesn't fray while we're working with our bag. Okay, now I can put my wooden board away. Right, lovely. Oh, lovely. Right, we're ready to start putting this together now. So what we're going to do is match up our darts as we did for our lining. Now it will be slightly more fun this time because you've got the bulk of the stabilizer there. So I'm going to do this with clips this time. And I'm going to go wild and do both sides at once. Had a short moment of regret there, thinking I'd got the wrong side, but that's okay. Now remember, we are finishing 1/2 inch from the end. So let's go ahead and mark that. Add my pin back there now. We'll do this side as well. Oh dear, it's gone out of place now. I shall have to realign. Okay. And then we're sewing exactly the same as we did for the lining. So our regular stitch length, our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we are stopping 1/2 inch from the end. So we're back stitching at the start of this dart. And then back stitching at the 1/2 inch mark. And we'll do the same on this side. Doesn't really matter which way you start on these darts, whether you start from the point or not, as long as you've got the seam allowance and the stopping and starting points. And then we'll just snip into the seam allowances very, very slightly on this exterior in those points. And then fold these last 2 points, these last 2 darts. This one maybe could benefit from being done at a different angle. There we go. And then just flatten these out. And again this side. We've got our points marked on where to start and stop. The only thing I would say is just pay attention to this crease and have a little peek before you sew, just to make sure that these edges are not buckled inside with your exterior fabric. I'm going to start from the point on this one, so let's add a pin, because I can leave the pin in until I've got it under the presser foot then. There we go. That would be a little bit easier to manoeuvre. And back stitching at the start. I just find if you're starting from the point on the exterior, it's worth double checking your seam allowance as you start sewing. Okay, and then this last side. Just gonna maneuver that into place as I'm sewing. I thought it'd be easier to do from the main bit. But it did pull out of place, so I should have pinned that. Okay. Right, I'm starting to see where all these loose threads are coming from. A little snip into there. That's probably the one I've already done actually, because that was quite easy to snip into. Snip into that seam allowance. And this seam allowance, and I've already done that seam allowance. Right. Okay, now exactly as we did before, I better double check I haven't missed anything on the pattern. Exactly as we did before, we are going to sew these side seams. So pull your points out of the way and match up the bottom edges. I'm going to use some pins for this, because it just stops it shifting out of place. And I'll do both at once, seeing as that seems to be what I'm doing. I'm doing 2 in 1 with these. So same seam allowance, same stitch length, back stitching at the start and the end. So along this whole side edge. Okay. Double check that from the inside before we sew the other one, just in case I've made a horrendous mistake. No, looks pretty good on the inside, so that's good. Same, and trim those threads and pull my pins out and have a little look, check that everything is where it should be on the inside. What's that? Oh, it's the top of a boat. Of course. Right, lovely. Now in an ideal world we would press these side seams open, but I'm just going to pin them open for the moment. And then we'll get on with finishing the bag, adding our lining and being ready to use our new bag. Right, let's pop this bag together. So I'm going to turn my exterior bag right sides out. It will be a bit more of a snug fit, but there should be fewer creases then when turning through. push that out all the way. Trying really hard not to spike myself on these pins in my seam allowances. And then I'm going to pop this inside my lining. Now, if you've got a right side or a front and a back to your exterior, pay attention to those when you're popping this inside the lining, where you want the pockets to be. I'm not really all that bothered about mine because mine's multi-directional and the same both sides. So I'm just going to pop it in. But if you've got a front and a back, then do pay attention to those. Now I'm going to match up, first of all, my side seams. And I've got my seams open still. I'm just going to pop a pin in the side there. And this side as well. Now it's quite funny because I've got a slightly higher side on one side of my lining and on one side of my exterior, and they're both on the same side. Obviously I've got some sort of consistency there. Consistency in errors. Okay, and then I'm going to mark these or pin these middle bits where I've got my centre marks. I've just made sure that those handles are pushed right down inside. So let me line up my, oh hang on, that's not my centre mark, that's the sail on a boat. I'm sure I had a centre mark on here though, around about there-ish I think. We'll soon find out if it doesn't match up. Okay. So I'm just going to shove my exterior down inside my lining so that this top edge is lined up, and I can clip around the rest of it. I can pin, doesn't really matter, pin or clip. I just find that on those centres and side seams it sort of stops it shifting around too much. Just work my way around. And then we'll pop it under the sewing machine, or through the sewing machine. I guess it's under the needle. Doesn't sound very good though, does it, under the needle? Sounds awful. Right, let me remove those pins from my flatbed. There we go. Right, so regular stitch length, regular seam allowance, and we're going to sew it around the entire top of the bag. Doesn't really matter where you start from, as long as we're consistent. This bag is big enough that I can just go on the top like this. If you were doing a smaller bag, you probably want to sew inside the bag. I'm literally just sew around the entire top now. Maybe should have sewn inside the bag. On reflection, if I could go back, I would change it to sew inside the bag because it's a bit annoying turning this. Fine on these flat bits, but when I'm going round, nearly back to the start now anyway. You can overlap or back stitch. I've sewn a little bit wonky there, but it should be okay. Right, lovely. So I'll take my pins out, and then we can turn the bag through. Check I haven't missed any pins. Great. So we've got this large opening in the bottom of the lining. We can pull the bag through from there. Makes it a little bit easier on a bag that's this size. And then we can push these bottom dart corners out nicely. Okay. And what I like to do is just reach inside, and where we've got these seam allowances open, just sort of hold those in place as you fold down, and then that will keep those seam allowances open after you've folded it down onto the inside. I'll do the same on this one as well. Just add a little pin in there. Oh, lovely. I think that's great so far. So far, so good. Now you've got the option of top stitching now or adding the base in first. Personally, I'm going to top stitch it first because I find top stitching is one of the most nerve-wracking things in bag making, and also your bag is a little bit more pliable and flexible before you put the base in. So I'm just clipping round the top. If you've got a lovely sized ironing board, then it is wonderful to press this before you top stitch. However, I think on my tiny pressing mat and my tiny iron, it's not really going to be much help, so I'm finger rolling. And as well, the stabilizer is pretty good and sturdy, so it does help the exterior fabric to sort of fall down naturally into place. Just work my way round. Now for this one, because I want to be stitching on the outside of the bag, I am going to turn it inside out and sew with my presser foot inside, just because I've got a flatbed and I haven't got an extension table. If you've got an extension table, then it would be good to just leave it as it is and sew around using the extension table. Now I've increased my stitch length up to my top stitching stitch length, which for me is a number 4, slightly longer. And as we're top stitching, just make sure that these handles are not caught in the way in at all. Sort of tuck those down inside. Lovely. Now, where am I going to start? Probably near to one of the side seams. I'm just going to pop it under my presser foot. I'm going to start with my needle down, because then I know that if I need to reposition my hands, I can do. I'm just going to sew around the entire top. Take your time doing this. Feed it through and push and pull this fabric however you need to, so that whatever goes under the presser foot is completely flat. Then you'll end up with a nice neat finish. I'm just repositioning every now and then. Don't have to do it all in one go, just do a little bit. And that's why I like to start with my needle down, so that I can reposition. where I started now. So I'm just going to pause a moment and pull my threads through to the back for tying off. I am going to overlap my stitches a little bit as well. I think it helps to tie them off. Just for that little bit of extra security there. I know it's only top stitching, it's not structural, it's not holding anything. Right, all done. I'll take these pins out before I spike myself. Let's see if I can pull this one through to the back as well. There we go. Trim those threads, lovely. And we can turn it right sides out again then. Obviously if you've used an extension table then yours will be right sides out anyway. I do all this to try and reduce creases, and then I create creases by turning it inside out to top stitch, but I think I like to top stitch on the outside of a bag. I think I probably always will. Right, great. Okay, so now we can pop our bag base in, get rid of some loose threads. So I'm just pushing down to flatten that base bit there, retrieve my mesh, can pop that in. I had that terribly uncentered there. Moved it over a bit. Right, so that's right on the edge of my darts on that side and on that side. And then what have I got? I've got holes in the third hole of my mesh. Great. Okay, feet. Has anybody seen my feet? I have them here somewhere. Here we go. I'm using Emmeline feet again. So what I'm going to do to add these feet is one hand inside the bag, holding the mesh in place, just push the foot through and then open up inside. I don't know if I can get it at an angle that you can see. Where have we gone? Is that way? That way. Everything's reversed on the camera. And then the same for the other three. I'm not using the washers this time because I've got my mesh in there, hold everything in place. So I'm just double checking that's still in the right place. So poke the foot through from the right side and open out on the inside. And then the same for these last two. Oh, I've moved my mesh slightly. There we go. I just want to make sure that I've got it sort of even. So I'm just smoothing it down to make sure that it's nice and flat. Don't want a buckled base in there. I'll end up with a buckled bottom, which doesn't sound very comfortable. Right, last foot. Okay, so I've opened up those prongs and I would like to add a little bit of tape to the back of them, which might be asking too much. I think I might have put it in my little caddy that I've taken downstairs. So I'm going to nip down and get some because that will help them to stay in place. So I'll be back in a moment. Right, I've got my tape. So I'll just cut a little piece and pop it over each foot on the back just to stop those prongs rubbing through onto my lining, and also just to add a little bit extra security to stop them popping out. Just add the last 2 bits. And then we can get these turning gaps closed and take our bag out for a nice trip. Sounds great. Okay, so we've got 2 turning gaps to close, although one of them I think is not even open at all. So I'll open my turning gap in my pocket first before we go any further, because I can't close my turning gap in my lining without opening this turning gap. If you're feeling brave and you're using just a canvas or something without any stabilizers, you could probably just turn it through the pocket as it is without having the extra hole in the bottom of the lining. Okay, right. Okay, so what we're going to do is reach through the zip pocket. Okay, so I've got my zip pocket there. Reach through the zip pocket and grab the lining. We really only need that bit of the lining that needs sewing closed. So I'll match my centre marks. Add a few extra clips all the way along. Then we're going to follow the same seam allowance that we had in the first place. I'm just going to change my stitch length back to my regular construction stitch length. Put those clips away. Okay, so I'm going to start in the seam allowance of where my stitching finished for this turning gap, and start and do some back stitching, and then increase out to my regular 1/4 inch. This wasn't it, 6mm seam allowance, although you can go slightly bigger on this turning gap if you want to just take away a bit of extra bulk. Depends how your lining's fitting. And then I've sewn into the seam allowance on the other side and back stitched there as well, and trim some of these extra threads. Okay. So we can push that back into place. Double check from this side that I haven't got too many stray threads poking through. No, I haven't got any, which is surprising. I thought I would have a few, so that's pretty good. And make sure that all your edges and corners and everything are pushed right out. That's perfect, lovely. And then the final step is just to pull the zip pocket out, and we'll close this turning gap. Now you can do this by hand with a ladder stitch, or you can do what I'm doing, and that's just do a really close top stitch. I find that's sufficient. It's inside your zip pocket, so nobody's really going to notice it, or I would hope not. If they're looking inside your zip pocket, then they probably don't really have the right to comment on anything inside your zip pocket. Now, I wonder whether my bobbin has just run out. It has, just before the last seam. Right, let me wind a bobbin quickly, and then I can get on with finishing this. That's such a shame, isn't it? Always the way on the last little bit of sewing. I'm glad that it lasted for that last seam that I did. I'm just going to wind a very small amount onto my bobbin because I've got a very small amount of stitching left and I haven't got any more of this thread up here. So, there we go. Just enough just to finish this last little bit. I'll pop my new bobbin in. Now I've got to re-thread my machine, which is always easiest done when being filmed, second only to somebody watching you. And I think it's at this point that my tongue pokes out a little as well. I'm concentrating. Oh, there we go. Managed it third time. Right, now we can close this turning gap just with a close machine stitch. I'm just going to back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, lovely. That was just enough thread, I think, to close that turning gap. And push my pocket back into place. I'm going to poke these corners out so that they're nice and neat. And you know, this combination of fabric and stabiliser, so I've used the non-fusible fleece and a Decaville light with a medium weight non-woven interfacing, has actually resulted in a bag that is not too wrinkled at all. So usually at the end of making a bag I would go and iron it, give it a good press, but that looks pretty good unpressed. I will still give it a final press when I go downstairs to the big ironing board just to know that it's been done properly, but that's turned out pretty good. Now I am really pleased with that. I think that looks great. I'm chuffed with it, and it's nice and open at the top. It's a nice wide opening, so if you're visiting the farmer's market or going shopping and you just want a nice big open tote that you can pop under your shoulder or carry easily on your arm, this is the ideal bag for you. It's got a little bit of a fun shape there with the darts in the corner. It's a little bit unusual. A few extra threads. We've got the feet just to keep it nice and dry if you're at the bus stop or catching a train or something, or even if you put your bag on the floor to pick up your purchases. Might even take this on a day out. I could easily take that to the beach, especially with this fabric. I hope you are sewing along with me, and I hope you've made an open top tote as well. Please do show me what you've made. I love to see. Please tag me at themakespace.uk. And I look forward to sewing with you again. Bye bye.